They say power is inherited, that wealth is a privilege of birth, but that's not true. The 0.01% who shape the world are not born different. They are trained to think differently. Sheikh Zayed was not born in a palace surrounded by gold. He was born in the desert, where survival was the first teacher. There was no luxury, no comfort, no noise, only the wind, the heat, and silence deep enough to teach a man how to listen. That's where his training began. While others learned to chase comfort, Zayed learned to endure. While others sought to be noticed, he learned to observe. Every decision, every word, every pause was shaped by that early discipline, patience, vision, and the ability to see further than others could. He watched how tribes cooperated to survive, how the land rewarded those who respected it, and how real strength never needed to be loud. Years later, when he led a nation, the same lessons guided him. His power did not come from wealth, but from clarity. Not from privilege, but from purpose. The world calls that elite, but in truth, it is the rare result of training the mind to master itself. Sheikh Zayed's real training did not happen in royal halls or under the guidance of scholars. It began in the wide silence of the desert, a place that tested men more than any institution ever could. He was born in Al Ain, a small oasis in the early 20th century when there were no formal schools, no electricity, and little comfort. His education was not written in books, but carved into experience. Every day, the desert shaped his character, forcing him to learn through observation, instinct, and humility. As a boy, Zayed watched his father and the elders of the tribe settle disputes, lead caravans, and make decisions that affected entire communities. He paid attention not only to what they said, but to how they behaved when no one was watching. This habit of silent observation became his most powerful skill. The desert was not just his home, it was his mentor. It taught him that survival depended on awareness, and that a single careless decision could cost lives. He learned to read the language of nature, the direction of the wind, the movement of sand, the behavior of animals. When the sky changed color, he knew a storm was coming. When a camel grew restless, he understood that water or danger might be near. These lessons, though simple, trained his mind to see patterns, to anticipate change, and to act with precision. Decades later, those same instincts guided him as he navigated political storms far more complex than any sandstorm. The desert also trained him in endurance. He rode long distances under a burning sun, sometimes going days with little rest or food. He slept on the ground beside his men, sharing the same hardships and never setting himself apart. Leadership, he discovered, was not about commanding from above, but walking alongside those you lead. When people saw him sharing their fatigue, they followed him out of respect, not fear. From the tribes, he learned the art of negotiation, a skill that would define his leadership of the United Arab Emirates. In a world of strong opinions and fragile alliances, Zayed understood that listening was more powerful than shouting. The desert had already taught him that those who speak last often see most clearly. When he sat with tribal leaders, he let them speak first, studying their words, their tone, and their silence. By the time he answered, his words carried the weight of thought, not reaction. These habits of patience, awareness, and respect became the invisible pillars of his leadership. They were not learned in theory, but forged in the daily struggle to survive and unite people who once lived divided by tribe and geography. When oil wealth later arrived, it did not change his character. It simply amplified what the desert had already built. He never forgot that every decision should serve the people, just as every grain of sand serves the desert's vast harmony. In truth, Sheikh Zayed's training was never about power in the conventional sense. It was about discipline, vision, and self-control. The harshness of the desert stripped away ego and weakness, leaving only what was essential: clarity. Years later, when the world called him a visionary leader, he knew that his wisdom did not come from luxury or privilege, but from those early lessons written by wind and silence. Power, he often believed, begins with awareness. Before acting, a man must learn to see, not only what is in front of him, but what is behind it, above it, and beyond it. Sheikh Zayed learned to see before he acted, and that became the foundation of his leadership. A truth born not in classrooms or palaces, but in the endless horizon of the desert that raised him. Sheikh Zayed's real power did not come from armies, titles, or wealth. It came from the quiet discipline that ruled his own mind. From his earliest days in the desert, he understood that no man could lead others if he could not first lead himself. The people around him often said that Zayed had a rare kind of calm, one that could silence a room without ever raising his voice. He carried himself with an authority that came not from fear, but from composure. When others lost control, he remained still, thinking, measuring, and only then speaking. That restraint became his greatest weapon. He was known for never reacting in anger. Even when insulted or betrayed, his face remained steady, his tone even. Once, when an advisor spoke harshly against him in public, those nearby expected immediate punishment. Instead, Zayed simply smiled and said, "Anger blinds justice." Later, he explained that a leader ruled through fairness, not emotion, and that a decision made in anger was a decision made blind. People came to understand that he was not passive. He was deliberate. He knew that control over impulse was the first form of real power. His daily life reflected that discipline. Zayed rose before dawn, prayed, and spent time in reflection before beginning his duties. He made space for silence, even during the most demanding periods of his rule. That morning routine grounded him. It reminded him that leadership was a form of service, not self-glory. Every day he reviewed reports, listened to advisors, met citizens, and ended his day with gratitude, not luxury. His self-control was not an act of restraint. It was a lifestyle built on rhythm, faith, and intention. Those who worked with him often noted that he never made rushed decisions. He took his time to understand every side of an issue before acting. Zayed believed that patience revealed truth, that what was hidden in haste became clear in time. Ministers and diplomats sometimes grew impatient waiting for his verdicts, but his method proved infallible. When he finally spoke, his conclusions were precise, balanced, and rooted in reason. "A man who rushes to judge," he once said, "judges himself unwise." In moments of crisis, his calmness was even more visible. During disputes among tribal leaders, Zayed often walked into heated rooms where tension was close to violence. He would greet everyone warmly, sit down quietly, and let the shouting continue for a while. Only when everyone had exhausted their anger would he speak. His voice was steady and slow, like water cooling the sand. Within minutes, the room softened. He reminded them of shared values, of the desert's lessons, that survival depended on unity, not ego. His ability to absorb conflict without reflecting it back made him a mirror in which others saw their own excess. That emotional discipline became a model for his people. In a region undergoing rapid change, from poverty to unimaginable wealth in a single generation, Zayed's steadiness prevented chaos. He insisted that progress without balance would destroy what made the Emirates unique. His restraint guided not only his behavior, but the identity of a nation that learned from his example. In his eyes, control over self was the foundation for control over destiny. He taught that anger is easy, patience is strength. Anyone can react, but few can respond with clarity. He used to say that the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest. Real power for him was the ability to pause, to think, and to act from principle, not pride. That's why people trusted him. They knew that his emotions never dictated his actions. Sheikh Zayed's discipline was not limited to politics. It extended to how he managed wealth and authority. Though surrounded by abundance, he lived modestly, often choosing simple meals and traditional clothes. He gave generously but never wastefully, teaching that generosity must come from intention, not impulse. His control over desires set an example for a generation raised amid sudden prosperity. By mastering himself, he ensured that wealth would serve the people, not enslave them. The world today celebrates quick thinkers, fast reactions, and instant opinions. Zayed's training was the opposite. He trained himself to slow down, to listen longer than anyone else, and to act only when sure. He believed that power is measured not by speed, but by steadiness. The world trains you to react fast. Zayed trained himself to respond right. And that, more than anything else, was the secret to his strength. In the end, his greatest achievement was not the modern nation he built, but the example he left behind. That self-mastery is the purest form of leadership. True power, as Sheikh Zayed proved, is not in commanding others, but in commanding oneself. When Sheikh Zayed became the ruler of Abu Dhabi, The discovery of oil promised a new era of wealth, an opportunity that could have easily turned into corruption or excess. Yet, while others might have seen fortune as a personal reward, Zayed saw it as a responsibility. He believed wealth was not meant to decorate the few, but to dignify the many. From his first day in power, his mission was clear: to serve before he prospered. He often said that money is like water. It must flow, or it becomes stagnant. To him, the purpose of wealth was to move through people, not stay trapped in vaults. The oil revenues began to pour in, but instead of building palaces or expanding his own luxuries, Sheikh Zayed directed the funds toward his people. He built homes for families who had lived in tents, schools for children who had never held a book, and hospitals for communities that had never known modern medicine. For him, progress was not measured in towers or gold, but in lives improved and dignity restored. Zayed's leadership broke the old pattern of rulers who governed from distance and privilege. He refused to be a leader who only read reports. He wanted to see reality with his own eyes. Without announcing it, he would leave the palace and drive into the desert, visiting remote villages. He walked through construction sites, asked workers about their conditions, and sat with farmers to discuss the challenges of the land. Many times, people were shocked to see him appear without warning, dressed simply, listening more than speaking. He believed that leadership without proximity was blindness. To serve well, he said, one must first understand. His connection with ordinary people became legendary. He often stopped his convoy to speak with children or help a stranded traveler. He listened to complaints and suggestions personally, recording details that most leaders would delegate. For Zayed, these encounters were not symbolic gestures, they were lessons. He believed every conversation, no matter how small, carried insight about the nation's heart. It was this direct contact that allowed him to govern with precision and empathy. He was deeply aware of how wealth can corrupt the human spirit. The sudden flow of oil money could have turned the Emirates into a society of greed and excess, but Zayed's humility anchored the nation. He warned his ministers that money was a test, not a triumph. He said that a man who serves wealth will lose himself, but a man who makes wealth serve others will build something eternal. His vision of prosperity was not individual, but collective, a shared rise that lifted all rather than a few. Under his guidance, roads connected isolated towns, electricity reached distant settlements, and clean water became a right, not a privilege. He created scholarship programs so that young Emiratis could study abroad and return with knowledge to strengthen their homeland. Each of these actions was part of a larger philosophy. Wealth is valuable only when it multiplies opportunity. That belief transformed Abu Dhabi from a poor region into a thriving modern state within a single generation. What made Sheikh Zayed's leadership extraordinary was his refusal to see himself as above anyone else. He sat on the ground with elders, shared meals with Bedouins, and made himself accessible to all. He often said that a ruler's worth is measured by how well he serves those with the least. His generosity was not driven by showmanship, but by faith. He believed that what you give returns multiplied, not just in material form, but in peace and respect. Even the way he built wealth had intention. He encouraged investment in agriculture and sustainability when few cared about such ideas. Planting trees in the desert seemed foolish to some, but Zayed saw it as a symbol, proof that wealth could heal what poverty had scarred. Those trees still stand today, living monuments to a man who believed prosperity should leave roots behind. His humility extended to his own lifestyle. Though he could have surrounded himself with opulence, he preferred simplicity. He lived in a modest home for many years, wore traditional clothing, and valued the quiet of prayer and family over extravagance. He used to say, "Luxury makes a man soft. Service keeps him strong." That discipline prevented wealth from changing him. Instead, it amplified his purpose. In the end, Sheikh Zayed's true fortune was not measured in oil or currency, but in the trust of his people. He built wealth by building them first. The citizens became his legacy, the nation his masterpiece. Long after his passing, his philosophy continues to define the Emirates, a reminder that power and prosperity mean nothing if not used for service. Zayed built wealth by building people first. That is the formula of the 0.01%. For the rare few who understand, that is the secret not only to leadership, but to lasting greatness. Sheikh Zayed possessed a kind of vision that is almost extinct in the modern world, a way of thinking not bound by years or political terms, but by generations. While most leaders planned for the next project, the next election, or the next financial cycle, Zayed thought in decades. He saw leadership as stewardship, not the pursuit of glory, but the duty to prepare the ground for those who would come after him. To him, time was a tool, not an enemy. He believed that if a leader served only the present, he would rob the future. In the early 1970s, when the Emirates were still finding their identity, Sheikh Zayed began one of the most ambitious environmental projects in the history of the region, planting trees in the desert. At the time, many dismissed the idea as madness. The desert, they said, was eternal and untamable, a sea of sand that could never bloom. But Zayed refused to accept that limitation. He believed that with persistence, science, and faith, even the harshest soil could bear life. He once told his advisors, "He who does not plan for the future will regret the present." It was more than a slogan. It was a principle that guided everything he did. He ordered the planting of millions of trees, date palms, acacias, and gaffs, across the barren lands. He introduced irrigation systems and encouraged research into agriculture suited to desert climates. Decades later, those efforts turned vast stretches of sand into fertile ground. The green desert that many tourists marvel at today is not a miracle of technology, but the legacy of a man who dared to think 40 years ahead. Each tree stands as silent proof that foresight can turn impossibility into inheritance. His long-term vision extended far beyond nature. Sheikh Zayed understood that nations are not built by wealth alone, but by wisdom, culture, and unity. In a time when neighboring regions were fractured by division, he devoted himself to building a federation, the United Arab Emirates, based on cooperation, respect, and shared purpose. The union was not easy. It required patience, negotiation, and faith in people's ability to grow together. Many doubted it would last. Yet, Zayed believed that when you plant trust deeply enough, it outlives fear. Today, the stability of the UAE remains the clearest testament to his belief in planting for the future. He also invested heavily in education, knowing that knowledge was the most valuable resource his nation could possess once the oil ran dry. "Wealth is temporary," he said, "but wisdom stays forever." He sent young Emiratis abroad to study engineering, medicine, law, and science, urging them to return and build their country with their own hands. His dream was not just a rich nation, but a self-sufficient one, a society guided by educated minds and strong values. Zayed's vision for the future was holistic. He did not separate material progress from moral responsibility. He often reminded his ministers that skyscrapers and airports meant nothing if people lost their sense of compassion. For him, true progress was the harmony between modernity and humanity, between technology and tradition. That is why, even as he built cities, he preserved the heritage of his ancestors, the Arabic language, Bedouin customs, and the spirit of hospitality that defined his people. He wanted every new generation to walk into the future without forgetting where they came from. His foresight also influenced how he managed the nation's wealth. While others rushed to exploit every barrel of oil, Zayed insisted on restraint. He saved resources, diversified the economy, and invested in infrastructure that would sustain the Emirates long after oil production declined. He understood that prosperity without planning was a mirage, bright for a moment, gone in the next. His policies ensured that the country's growth remained steady, deliberate, and sustainable. Those who knew him said that Zayed carried an unusual calm whenever he spoke about the future. He didn't just imagine it, he felt responsible for it. When others saw uncertainty, he saw opportunity. His strength came from his ability to act today for what he might never personally witness. That is the essence of leadership, to plant seeds knowing you may not live to see them bloom. Most people chase quick gains because they fear time. Sheikh Zayed embraced time as his ally. He understood that patience multiplies value, and that legacy, not applause, defines greatness. While others built wealth to be remembered, Zayed built foundations to be continued. His entire philosophy could be summarized in one truth: the world rewards those who think beyond themselves. Most chase quick gains. Zayed built lasting value, and that is real elite training. Sheikh Zayed's life stands as quiet proof that the highest form of power does not come from dominance, but from discipline, and that the purest wealth is not measured in gold, but in purpose. He showed the world that being part of the true elite has nothing to do with privilege. It is about responsibility. For him, greatness was never inherited. It was earned through patience, service, and faith. He was not trained in the classrooms of the powerful or mentored by strategists and economists. His education was carved by the wind, the desert, and the people he served. The silence of Al-An taught him clarity. The hardships of early leadership taught him compassion. And the act of serving others taught him humility, the virtue that separates those who seek power from those who are ready for it. Throughout his life, Sheikh Zayed never confused influence with importance. He knew that a man's true worth was measured not by what he owned, but by what he gave. He built a nation not by controlling people, but by believing in them. His greatest wealth was the trust of his citizens, trust earned not through words, but through action. To him, every decision was a test of integrity, and every success a reason for gratitude. The world often looks for secret formulas to become powerful or rich, imagining that the elite hide something exclusive, a code, a method, a mystery. But Zayed's training was no secret. It was simply rare. It demanded patience where others rushed, humility where others demanded recognition, and discipline where others sought comfort. These are not the lessons most want to learn, because they require self-mastery, the hardest form of success. When he passed away in 2004, Sheikh Zayed left behind not only a prosperous nation, but a living philosophy. His legacy was not just in the skyline of Abu Dhabi or the green that now covers the desert. It was in the quiet strength of a people who inherited his mindset, a people who learned that service builds nations, and that wealth without purpose is emptiness dressed as success. True power, he believed, begins with the ability to lead yourself before leading others. The leader who cannot master his ego will always be ruled by it. The man who cannot control his desires will always be owned by them. Zayed's wisdom was simple, yet revolutionary. Before you seek to rule the world, learn to rule your thoughts. That is the foundation of all greatness. They were never meant to know this, because most wouldn't live it. Power and wealth begin with self-mastery.